Hey, it's late, isn't it? You're lying there in the dark, phone in hand, the rest of the world somewhere far away from you right now. Maybe the house is quiet. Maybe there's that one lamp still on. Maybe you've got your fan running because the white noise makes the silence feel less loud. I just want you to know the fact that you're watching something like this at this hour, that tells me something about you. You're one of those people. The ones who feel things deeply. The ones who think about stuff that most people brush past without a second glance. The ones who lie awake not because something is wrong exactly, but because being alive is just a lot to process sometimes. So let's just sit with that for a bit. Let's talk about some things. Soft things, sad things, beautiful things. The kind of stuff that makes your chest feel a little full and your eyes a little heavy and your heart a little tender in the best possible way. Let's talk about the strange, bittersweet, quietly heartbreaking experience of being a human who remembers things. Okay, so here's the first thing that gets me, and I need you to really sit with this one. At some point in your life, there was a last time you did everything you used to love doing as a kid. A last time you played with your toys. A last time you ran through a sprinkler in the backyard. A last time you asked your mom or dad to read you a bedtime story. A last time you believed in Santa Claus, or the Easter Bunny, or whatever magic thing you held on to as a child. And here's what's so heartbreaking about that. You didn't know. You had no idea. There was no announcement, no ceremony, no little part of your brain that said, hey, pay attention, this is it. This is the last time. You just stopped. You grew up, you moved on, and that moment, that last ordinary Tuesday afternoon of playing pretend or building a fort out of couch cushions, just slipped away like it was nothing. Psychologists actually have a term connected to this. It's tied to the concept of nostalgia, which, by the way, used to be considered a medical condition. Like actual doctors in the 17th and 18th centuries treated it as a serious illness. Swiss soldiers stationed far from home would get so homesick, so consumed by this aching longing for the past, that they'd waste away. They'd lose weight, they'd lose their will to fight. The word itself comes from the Greek nostos, meaning return home, and algos, meaning pain. Homesickness pain. The pain of wanting to return. We don't really think of nostalgia as a disease anymore. Now we actually know it does something kind of beautiful and necessary for us psychologically. It buffers loneliness. It gives us a sense of continuity. It reminds us that our lives have meaning and story. But it still has that ache in it. That's the thing. It's one of the only emotions that's built half from joy and half from grief, all at the same time. And the last time thing, man, I think about that a lot. Because there are last times happening right now today that you don't know are last times yet. The last time you'll drive a certain route to a place you love. The last time you'll see a particular friend before life shifts. The last conversation you'll have with someone before they become a different, more distant version of themselves. You won't know. You never know. And somehow that's both devastating and weirdly beautiful, because it means every ordinary moment has this hidden potential to be sacred. You just can't always see which ones they are. There's this idea in psychology about something called the end of history illusion. Researchers studied thousands of people across different ages and found something wild. We all consistently believe that we have changed a lot in the past, but that we won't change much in the future. We look back and see how different we were 10 years ago. The things we cared about, the music we listened to, the person we were dating, the dreams we had, and we fully acknowledge the transformation. But when we look forward, we always think, yeah, but I'm basically who I am now. This is me. This is the finished version. And then 10 years later, we look back at who we are now and think, oh wow, I was so different. Every single time. It happens to everyone. We just can't see it while it's happening. Think about the people you used to be. Not in a cringe way, not in a God, I was so embarrassing way, just in a soft, curious way. The version of you who was 7 years old and had very specific opinions about things. The version of you at 13 who desperately wanted to be understood. The version of you at 17 who was so certain about everything and so afraid underneath all of it. The version of you in your early 20s just trying to figure out how to be a real person. Those versions of you are gone now. They don't exist anymore except in memories and old photos and the faint muscle memory of habits you eventually outgrew. And yet they were you. Fully, completely you. They felt everything as intensely as you feel things now. They had whole inner worlds. They had hopes that mattered enormously to them. They had moments of joy so pure and specific they could never be replicated. There's something that feels almost like grief when you sit with that. Like you've had so many small deaths within one lifetime. So many selves left behind on the road. But here's the thing. And this is the part that soothes me a little. Those people aren't really gone. They're in you. Every single one. The anxious kid, the hopeful teenager, the lost young adult. They're all still somewhere in there, folded into who you became. You carry them with you without always knowing it. Sometimes you feel them, in the way a certain song makes you feel suddenly 7 years old again, or the way being by water makes something in you go quiet and peaceful, because some version of you once stood by water and felt safe. You are not one person. You are a whole procession of people who all happen to live inside the same body, all trying their best. You know that feeling when you go back to somewhere you used to love. Your childhood neighborhood, your old school, a place you spent a significant summer, and it's just not quite right. Not because anything terrible happened to it, but because the version of it that lives in your memory is more real to you than the actual physical place. The corner store is a smoothie shop now. The field where you used to play is a parking lot. Your old bedroom has been repainted, and the closet where you hid during hide and seek is full of someone else's things. The place exists, but your place is gone. There's a word for this that I think about a lot. Hireth. It's a Welsh word that doesn't translate perfectly into English, which is kind of perfect because the feeling it describes doesn't quite fit into any clean category. It means a longing for home, for a place or a time that you can't return to. Maybe because it's gone. Maybe because it never quite existed the way you remember it. It's homesickness mixed with grief, mixed with the particular ache of knowing that what you're missing is, at least partly, a feeling. A version of the world that only existed in the specific light of your specific childhood, your specific perspective. You can't go back there. Not because the world moved, although the world did move, but because you moved. The camera has changed, the lens is different, that exact feeling of being small in the big familiar world, of everything being tinged with that golden after-school light, you can't step into that river again. And isn't that the most bittersweet thing? That so much of what we miss isn't really the place or the time. It's the feeling. It's the version of ourselves who inhabited those moments. We're nostalgic not for the thing itself, but for what it felt like to be alive inside of it. Psychologists have found that nostalgia is actually most often triggered by sensory cues. A smell, especially. Smell is processed in the brain in a way that bypasses the rational, language processing parts and goes straight to the limbic system, the emotional core of the brain. That's why a certain smell can hit you like a freight train. Not a gradual recognition, but an ambush. Suddenly you're 7 years old and it's the first day of school and the air smells like pencil shavings and your new backpack and the particular shampoo your mom used. Suddenly you're in your grandparents' kitchen and the whole world is that combination of wood and cooking and something warm and safe you can't name. The brain stores those sensory memories differently than other memories. They're not filed away in the same rational, organized system. They're embedded deeper, more primal, more animal. And when something unlocks them, they don't come back as information. They come back as experience, as feeling, as you suddenly and completely being somewhere else and someone else, all at once. That's why nostalgia can feel so physical. It's not just a thought. It lives in the body. Here's something I want you to think about tonight. There are people in your life who genuinely had no idea how much they mattered to you. A teacher who said one thing one time, maybe not even to you directly, maybe just in front of the class, that lodged itself into your brain and changed something. A neighbor you barely knew but who waved every single morning and whose consistency made the world feel safer. An older kid who was kind to you once on a playground at a moment when kindness was the thing you needed most. These people don't know. They almost certainly have no idea that they are a character in your story, that they left a mark, that somewhere out there you carry a piece of them, their voice, their gesture, their one moment of decency or warmth or brilliance, and it became part of how you understand the world. The average person will have meaningful contact with thousands of people in their lifetime. Thousands. And most of those contacts will feel like nothing. Like ships in the night, like strangers at the grocery store. But some of them, a scattered handful, will catch on something new and change your direction. Slightly or significantly. You won't always know which encounters were the important ones until years later, if ever. This is simultaneously one of the most humbling and one of the most comforting things about being human. Humbling because it means the power we have over each other is largely invisible. We are shaping people constantly without knowing it. The way you speak to the kid who's a little awkward at the party, the small kindness you show to the colleague who's clearly having a terrible week, the way you handle yourself when things get hard and other people are watching, all of it matters. All of it lands on someone somewhere and becomes part of how they understand what people are like, what the world is like, whether it's a safe place to be soft. And comforting because it means you have been shaped too. By hundreds of small acts of grace you may have already forgotten. There are people whose names you might not even remember who helped make you who you are, who held a door open in some metaphorical sense at exactly the right moment. who showed you that the thing you were afraid was true about yourself was actually fine, was actually good, was actually something worth keeping. You are a mosaic, a collage of everyone who ever left an impression on you, layered over the original material of who you already were. Let's talk about right now, this exact moment. It's late. The world is asleep, or at least pretending to be. There's something about the nighttime hours, particularly the ones between midnight and 3 a.m. or so, that does something specific to the brain and the emotions. Sleep researchers talk about this a little. The prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for rational thought, for putting the brakes on things, for saying, okay, that's enough. Yeah, let's be logical about this. That part starts to wind down as the day gets later and your sleep drive increases, which means the more emotional, more associative parts of your brain get to come to the surface a little more. The guards step down, the filters thin out. That's why everything feels bigger at night. The things you're sad about are sadder. The things you love feel more precious. The questions you've been avoiding have a way of sitting down next to you in the dark and saying, okay, it's just us now. Let's talk. There's also something called the quiet hours effect. Not an official term, but something a lot of people report, where the absence of daytime noise and distraction creates a kind of acoustic space for memory and feeling. When the world gets quiet, the past gets louder. You hear things in the silence that you can't hear when the machinery of daily life is running. I think that's why so many people are night people, even when they don't mean to be. Not because the night is particularly good for productivity or health. It's not, we know this, but because it offers something rare. The feeling of being out of time, suspended. The obligations of tomorrow haven't started yet. The regrets of yesterday are far enough away. There's just this strange, still, in-between space where you can think thoughts that don't quite fit into the daytime version of your life. And in that space, things get tender, things get honest. You miss people you haven't thought about in months. You feel grateful for things you barely noticed when they were happening. You think about the arc of your life in a way you can't when you're busy living it minute to minute. The night is where a lot of people secretly live their emotional lives. There's a whole vocabulary of emotions that most languages, including English, don't have clean words for, which means millions of people are walking around feeling things they can't articulate, which makes the feelings harder to process, harder to share, harder to know that other people feel them too. There's Sonder, the realization that each random person you pass has a life as vivid and complex and full of meaning as your own. The person driving the car next to you at the red light has a whole inner world. They have a childhood. They have a favorite food. They have someone they miss. They have a fear they've never told anyone. They're the main character of an entire universe, and you'll never know a single thing about it. You're just two people at a red light, and then you're gone from each other's lives forever. There's anemoia, which is nostalgia for a time you've never actually lived in. That feeling of longing for the 1950s or the 1970s, or some other era you only know from photographs and movies and your parents' stories. You weren't there, but something about it calls to you. Something about the aesthetic or the pace or the particular texture of life in that time feels like somewhere you belong, somewhere you've lost without ever having had it. There's canopsia, The eerie, melancholy atmosphere of a place that's usually busy but is now empty. A school hallway in summer, a fairground in the off-season, an office building late at night. The absence of the people who are usually there feels almost like a presence in itself, the ghost of the crowd. There's onism, the frustration of being stuck in just one body, one life, one set of choices. You're aware that somewhere out there are 1,000 lives you could be living. Different cities, different relationships, different versions of yourself. And you can only have one. You have to choose. And every choice closes other doors. You live with this quiet awareness of all the other paths that branch away from the one you're on. There's liberosis, the desire to care less about things, to not feel everything so hard, to be one of those people who shrugs and moves on, who doesn't lie awake replaying conversations, who isn't haunted by things that didn't work out, not because you want to stop caring. Caring is part of what makes you who you are, but because sometimes it's just so heavy. These feelings exist. They're real, they're part of the human experience. And the fact that they don't all have easy English translations just means that we've been quietly suffering them and secretly treasuring them, largely alone, without knowing how universally they're felt. You're not strange for having these feelings. You're not too much. You're just paying attention. This is the softest, saddest part, so stay with me. When someone you love dies or drifts away or becomes someone so different from who they were that it feels like a kind of death, you don't lose them entirely. What you actually lose is the future conversations, the future visits, the future moments you would have had. What you get to keep, and this is real, this has been studied, is everything that already happened. Every memory, every impression, every way they changed you, that you carry. Grief researchers talk about something called continuing bonds theory, which is the understanding that healthy grieving doesn't mean severing your connection to someone who's gone. It means transforming the relationship, finding a new way to maintain it in the absence of their physical presence, keeping them alive in how you talk about them, in the habits you adopted because of them, in the values they shaped in you. There's a way in which the people we've lost live through us. The way your grandmother laughed is in the way you laugh. The phrase your friend always used is in your vocabulary now. The courage that person modeled for you shows up in your own courage on the hard days. They are threaded into you. They are part of the person who shows up in the world every day. And the strange, tender thing about grief is that it doesn't really diminish with time, not entirely. It changes shape. In the early days, it's this acute, overwhelming, all-consuming thing. Later, it becomes more like a stone in your pocket. You forget it's there most of the time, but every once in a while, your hand finds it, and you feel the weight of it, and you remember. And sometimes that remembering is sad, and sometimes it's warm, and sometimes it's both at once. There are also people who were still alive, but who you've lost anyway. Friends who drifted, relationships that ended, family members you grew apart from in ways that were nobody's fault and everybody's fault, and deeply, quietly painful in a way that doesn't get much social permission to be acknowledged. Because how do you grieve someone who's still alive? How do you mourn a friendship that just gradually stopped with great difficulty and mostly in the dark, apparently? Can we just sit with childhood summers for a minute? I don't even know where you grew up or what your childhood was like. Maybe it was beautiful, maybe it was complicated, maybe it was both, the way most things are. But I suspect there was something, a specific memory, a specific feeling, a specific pocket of time that represents to you what safe and free felt like before you knew the world was heavy. For a lot of people, it's summer, the peculiar infinity of summer when you were young, the way time moved differently, the way a day could feel like a week, the way you could be bored out of your mind in the afternoon and somehow that boredom felt like abundance, like spaciousness, like luxury. Because you had all this time that wasn't spoken for and you were just being in it. The specific textures of it, hot pavement under bare feet, the smell of chlorine in your hair that wouldn't wash out, the way everything went golden and long in the late afternoon, the specific happiness of being called in for dinner when you didn't want to come in, the way the streetlights coming on was a signal, a ritual, the world's way of saying the day was done. There's research on the psychology of childhood memory that describes something called the reminiscence bump. The finding that people tend to have clearer, more vivid memories of events that happened between the ages of roughly 10 and 25 than of events from any other time in their lives. It's partly because that's a period of so many firsts. First experiences form stronger memories than repeated ones. And it's partly because that's when identity is forming, when you're figuring out who you are, and the experiences from that time get encoded with a kind of significance that ordinary adult life doesn't quite replicate, which means your brain is, by design, built to make that period of your life feel more vivid, more meaningful, more present than it technically is. Your past is not the same size as your present. Your childhood takes up more psychological space. And so when you think about those summers, there's a brightness to them that's partly real and partly how your brain chose to store them. A little bit constructed, a little bit legend, but the feeling underneath, that sense of being small and safe and unaware of the weight of things, that was real. You can't go back there, but it's okay that you miss it. I want you to think about the things you almost said, the feelings you held back, the conversations you rehearsed in your head but never had, the letter you wrote and deleted, the phone call you thought about making at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night because something about that day made you want to tell someone you loved them, but you didn't want to be weird about it, so you put your phone down. We live with so much unuttered love, so much affection that never made it out into the air where it could do anything. There's a famous study, well, famous in certain psychology circles, about what people regret most on their deathbeds, and it's not the things they did that haunt them most. It's the things they didn't do, the words they didn't say, the risks they didn't take, the love they had and didn't fully express. And here's the heartbreaking part. The people they wanted to say those things to often didn't know. Probably went through their whole lives without knowing how much they were loved by this specific person, how much they had mattered, how many times they were thought of. There's so much invisible love in the world, carried quietly by people who don't know how to express it, or are afraid of how it will land, or simply never got the right moment. People thinking about you right now that you have no idea are thinking about you. People who count you as important, who are glad you exist, who would be genuinely sad if you disappeared from the world. You might be doing the same thing to someone, loving them quietly, hoping they somehow know without you having to say it. They probably don't know. Not the way you know it on the inside. This isn't an instruction. I'm not going to tell you to text someone right now because you know yourself and you know what's right. But just sit with the awareness that love is abundant, it's just shy. It's everywhere, in people's private thoughts and half-written messages and the slight catch in the voice when they talk about someone they care about. The world is full of quiet love, more than you can see. Nobody really talks about how growing up is a kind of ongoing loss. We talk about it as gain, and it is. It's enormous gains. Freedom, understanding, capacity, depth. But it's also shedding. You shed versions of yourself constantly. You shed certain kinds of wonder. You shed the particular way you used to be moved by things before you had words for them, and therefore before you could process them out of their raw emotional power. Children cry with their whole bodies. Have you noticed that? They don't hold it in their chest and manage it and think about whether it's appropriate for the setting. They just cry. It goes through them like weather. Most adults have forgotten how to do that. We learned somewhere along the way to contain it, to manage it, to feel it in the throat and the jaw and the tight space behind the eyes without letting it break the surface. We got very good at that. Impressively good. And there's something lost in that. Not something that should be grieved excessively. It's part of functioning in the world, part of what allows us to be present for others, part of the dignity of navigating difficult things without falling apart every time. But something is lost. Some access to the raw experience, some permission. I think that's partly why things like this, sad music, nostalgic videos, movies that make you cry, serve such an important function for people. They give you an acceptable container for feelings that don't have an obvious outlet in everyday life. They give you permission to feel things that you've been quietly carrying, to feel them in the relative safety of the dark, in private or in the shared privacy of watching something together. Researchers have a term for the bittersweet emotion you feel when consuming sad music or art. Kama mutta is one, from Sanskrit, the feeling of being moved, of being touched. And studies have consistently found that people seek out sad music and sad content not to make themselves feel worse, but often to feel better, to feel connected, to feel understood, to feel their own emotions reflected back at them in a way that confirms they're not alone in having them. You're not alone. Whatever you're carrying tonight, whatever quiet sadness or vague longing or unnamed ache brought you here, you're not alone in it. Someone, many someones, felt exactly what you're feeling. Felt it in the dark, in the late hours, in the particular tender aftermath of a day that was fine but somehow still exhausting just from the effort of being alive in it. Missing someone is one of the strangest experiences the human nervous system produces. It's not quite pain and not quite pleasure. It's more like an ache, a specific yearning that lives in the chest and the stomach, sometimes manifesting physically as something that feels almost like hunger, which makes sense actually. Attachment is a survival mechanism. The brain treats the loss of an attachment figure with responses that overlap with physical pain. Missing someone is the nervous system's way of insisting that an important resource has been withdrawn and needs to be found. When you miss someone, your brain actually replays memories of them more vividly than it would otherwise. It's looking for clues, trying to find them in a sense in the archive. And the memories tend to surface with more emotional charge than usual. Not just the content of the memory, but the full felt sense of it. The way the person smelled, the quality of their laugh, the specific feeling of being in their presence. There are people you miss right now. I'd be willing to bet on it. Maybe someone who's gone, passed away, moved far, drifted out of your life. Maybe someone who's actually fine in the world, but you haven't seen them in a while, and you miss the particular version of yourself you were when you were with them. Maybe you miss someone who's still in your life, but the relationship has shifted and you miss what it used to be. Missing people is part of having loved them. It's the shadow that love casts when it encounters distance or time or loss. You can't have the love without the potential for the missing. They come together. And the missing, as much as it hurts, is also proof. It's evidence that something real happened. That there was a person who meant something to you, who left an impression, who mattered. The ache is the record of that. Here's one more thing before we start to wind down. Time doesn't move the way it feels like it moves. We know this intellectually, but the experience of it keeps surprising us anyway. When you're a child, a summer is basically forever. It contains multitudes. It stretches out in both directions beyond what you can see. When you're an adult, a summer is gone before you finish planning what to do with it. There's a psychological explanation for this, and it has to do with proportion and novelty. When you're 5 years old, 1 year is 20% of your entire life experience. It's enormous in proportion. And childhood is also full of firsts. First times experiencing everything, which means maximum novelty, which means maximum encoding in memory, which means time feels rich and full and slow. As you get older, a year is a smaller proportion of your total lived experience, and life contains more repetition. You've done most things before, you have routines. The world doesn't surprise you in quite the same way. Less novelty, less encoding, less sense of time's texture. The years start to compress. They start to feel like they're moving faster. One theory suggests that the way to slow time down, at least perceptually, is to seek out novelty. New experiences, new places, new people, new challenges. Things your brain has to actually pay attention to because it hasn't seen them before. Travel is a classic example of this. 2 weeks in a place you've never been can feel, in memory, like months, because every day was full of new impressions that your brain dutifully stored. But I think there's another way too, and it's the opposite of novelty. It's presence. It's slowness. It's doing what you're doing right now, lying still in the dark, letting your thoughts wander through the territory of your life without rushing them somewhere. It's giving time room to be itself instead of always filling it with the next thing. The moments that stay with us most are often not the extraordinary ones. They're the ones where we were somehow here, present, quietly aware of being alive. The conversation on the porch, the late night drive where nobody was talking, just existing in comfortable parallel. The morning when the light came through the window a certain way and everything was, briefly and unremarkably, completely fine. Those moments are happening all the time. They're happening right now, actually. The room you're in, the specific quality of the dark, the feeling of the bed under you, the night sounds, the exact temperature. This is a moment you will someday be nostalgic for. This specific, unremarkable evening will be, at some point in the future, a golden thing you can't get back to. That's the great irony of nostalgia. You're always standing inside what will someday be the past. The moment you're experiencing right now, this one, is already becoming a memory, is already, in some sense, gone. It's late. You should probably sleep soon. I hope something in here tonight landed softly for you. I hope it made you feel a little less alone in whatever you're carrying, a little more tender toward the people in your life, a little more patient with the version of yourself who exists right now. In this moment, doing their best with what they have. You are a complicated, beautiful, ongoing project. You have been shaped by people who didn't know they were shaping you. You carry versions of yourself who love things with great intensity and then had to leave them behind. You hold loss and love simultaneously without always knowing which is which. You lie awake in the dark sometimes because the world is too big to process entirely and you need the quiet hours to catch up. That's not a flaw. That's what it means to be a person who's really here, really alive, really paying attention. The past is always with you. The people you've loved are threaded through you. The moments you've lived are not gone exactly. They're somewhere in you, inaccessible but present, like light that's sunk into water. Take care of yourself tonight. Drink some water. Let the thoughts settle. Let the day be over. Tomorrow is another chance to be the person you're slowly becoming. Good night. There's something that happens to most people at some point, usually late at night, usually when they're tired enough that their defenses are down. This sudden, almost overwhelming awareness that time is actually passing. Not in the abstract way you know it intellectually, but in a felt way, a physical way. Like you can actually feel the current of it moving under you. And for a moment it's almost dizzying, because you realize that you are not standing still while time moves around you. You are moving with it. You are being carried, and you can't get off. Psychologists sometimes call this mortality salience, the heightened awareness of one's own impermanence. And the interesting thing is, it doesn't have to be triggered by anything dramatic. It's not always a funeral or a diagnosis or a near miss. Sometimes it's just a random Tuesday evening when you look at your hands and think, these are the hands of someone who is getting older, and the world feels suddenly very tender and very precious and very heartbreakingly brief. That feeling is uncomfortable. But researchers have found that it also does something important. When people are gently reminded of their own impermanence, they tend to become more compassionate, more generous, more focused on the things that actually matter to them. Their relationships, their values, the experiences they want to have. The awareness of the end, it turns out, has a way of clarifying the middle. So if you're lying there tonight feeling that particular tender ache of time passing, that's not something going wrong with you. That's something going right. That's your brain doing you the favor of paying attention. Let's talk about photographs for a minute, because I think about this a lot, and I don't think people talk about it enough. There is a specific kind of grief that comes from looking at old photographs of people you love. Not grief for anything that's been lost necessarily, just grief at the fact that that moment is sealed. It happened. It's over. Those exact faces, that exact light, that specific afternoon, it exists now only as an image, flat and quiet, unable to move or speak or laugh or be anything other than what it already was. When you look at an old photo of yourself as a child, that child cannot know you're looking. They're in there, frozen, looking at whatever they were looking at in that moment, completely unaware that decades later you'd be staring back at them from a different life. There's something almost unbearable about that asymmetry. You can see them, they can't see you. You know how the story goes. They don't know anything yet. And photographs of people who have since died carry something extra. There's a philosopher named Roland Barthes who wrote about this, about how every photograph contains within it a kind of premonition of death. Not in a morbid way, but in a structural one. The photograph says, "This person was here alive in this light on this day." And by saying that, it also implies, and then time moved on. The moment ended. We kept going. They might not have. There's also something about childhood photos specifically that does something strange and sad. When you see a photo of yourself at 5 or 8 or 12, you see a person who had no idea what was coming, who didn't know which friendships would last and which would quietly dissolve, who hadn't yet encountered the specific heartbreaks and losses and beautiful, difficult things that would shape who they became. They're innocent in a way you can never be again. Not because the world was gentler then, but because they hadn't met it yet. You want to protect that kid. You want to lean into the photo and say, hey, it's gonna be okay. Also, pay attention. Also, tell the people you love that you love them. Also, don't worry so much about what other people think, because honestly, nobody's paying as much attention as you believe they are. You want to say so many things, and you can't because it's a photograph, and anyway, you already lived it. Here's something that I find both beautiful and quietly heartbreaking about the way human memory works. Your memories are not recordings. They're not files stored accurately on a hard drive somewhere in your brain. Every single time you remember something, you are reconstructing it, actively rebuilding it from fragments. The emotional impression of it, the sensory details you happen to encode at the time, the story you've told yourself about it since, and every time you reconstruct it, you change it slightly. You add things from what you know now. You color it with feelings that came later. You smooth out the parts that don't quite fit the version of the story you've landed on. This means that some of your most cherished memories are, at least in part, stories you've told yourself so many times that they've taken on their own life. The memory of your grandmother's kitchen might be accurate in its emotional truth. The warmth, the safety, the specific quality of being loved in that place. But the specific details might have shifted and settled over the years into something slightly more golden than the original. And here's the thing. That's not a flaw. That's not your brain lying to you. That's your brain doing what it was designed to do, making meaning, organizing experience into narrative, taking the raw, chaotic data of a life and shaping it into something that holds together, something that tells a coherent story about who you are and where you came from and what matters. Memory is as much an act of creation as it is an act of retrieval. You are, in a very real sense, the author of your own past. Not in the sense that you can make things up freely, but in the sense that the version of the past you carry is genuinely yours. It has your fingerprints on it. It reflects your values and fears and loves and losses in ways that a perfectly accurate recording never could. The past you carry is not quite what happened. It's what happened filtered through everything you are. Can we talk about the specific sadness of a childhood home that no longer belongs to you? Whether you moved, or your parents moved, or life just shifted in the way it shifts, there's something particularly tender about the knowledge that the house you grew up in is just out there somewhere, existing, maybe being lived in by another family, and it has absolutely no idea that it was once the entire world to you. The room where you learned to read, the staircase you slid down, the specific spot in the kitchen where the light came in a certain way on weekend mornings, the backyard that felt infinite when you were 6 and now you know is probably just a normal sized backyard. That house doesn't know it was sacred. The new family living there, if there is one, doesn't know that the floor in the hallway creaking like that used to be the sound that meant your dad was home, or that the window in the corner bedroom was the one you used to stare out of when you were sad, or that there was once a mark on the door frame where someone measured your height every birthday and you stood up straight as you possibly could, trying to be taller than you were. All of that is invisible now. The history of a place doesn't transfer with it when the people move on. The new residents will make their own history over the top of yours. Their children will have their own sacred creak, their own window, their own mark on the door frame, and someday they'll be lying somewhere just like you, late at night, thinking about the kitchen light. There's something strangely comforting in that, actually. Every house that has ever been loved is layered, is full of invisible lives. You are not the only person who has ever ached for a room that no longer belongs to you. The aching is very, very old. Let me tell you something about the people who knew you before you became who you are. There's a particular kind of intimacy that belongs only to people who knew you when you were younger, messier, less formed. The childhood friend who saw you at your most embarrassing and unguarded. The sibling who watched you grow up from the inside. The parent who knew you before you could talk, before you had opinions, before you had any idea who you were going to become. Those people hold a version of you that you can't fully access yourself. They remember things you've forgotten. They have impressions of you from periods of your life that exist in your own memory only as vague feelings, an emotional weather rather than specific scenes. And when you're with them, sometimes you can feel it. This other version of yourself, younger and more unfinished, hovering somewhere in the air between you. There's a reason that childhood friends, when you reconnect with them after years apart, can feel both like strangers and like the most known people in the world at the same time. Because they knew a you that no longer exists in its original form, but they knew that you so completely that some of it is still in them. And when you're together, some of it comes back. This is also, I think, part of why losing those connections hurts in a specific way. When an old friend drifts away or passes away, or simply becomes someone too different to truly reconnect with, you lose not just the person, but the witness, the person who remembered. And your own history becomes, in some small way, less witnessed, less confirmed. We need people who remember us. It's one of the quieter, less talked about human needs. To be seen across time, to have someone who can say, I remember when you were like this. I remember when you first did that. I remember who you were before all of this. Here is a psychological fact that I think is one of the most quietly devastating and quietly beautiful things I've ever learned. The smell of rain, that specific, clean, electric smell that comes just before it rains, and the earthier, more complex smell of wet ground after it rains, has names. Petrichor, for the after rain smell. And it triggers something in the human brain that is not entirely explained by mere familiarity or conditioning. Researchers think it's partly evolutionary. That smell signals water, which signals survival, which is why it produces that particular feeling of deep, involuntary calm in so many people. But what strikes me is how universal it is. People across cultures, across continents, across centuries, people who have nothing else in common, will stop what they're doing when that smell comes through the air. We'll breathe it in. We'll feel for just a moment something that's hard to name. Something between peace and longing. Something that feels like coming home to a place you've never been. You are not separate from the natural world, even when it feels like you are. Your nervous system is ancient. It carries responses and calms and alarms that were written into it long before you were born, long before language, long before any of the noise of modern life. When the rain smell hits you and something in you exhales, that's not you. That's something older than you, something that lives inside you but has been there since long before you arrived. I find that incredibly comforting for some reason. The idea that part of what you are is very, very old. That the part of you that settles at the smell of rain or the sound of water or the warmth of morning sun, that part is not worried about the things you're worried about tonight. That part is just here, doing what it has always done, being alive in a body on a planet, the same way it's been done for hundreds of thousands of years. Let's talk about the phenomenon of recognizing yourself in something. You're reading a book, and there's a character who does something, or feels something, or thinks something, and you stop. You read it again. Because somehow, in this story, written by someone you've never met, set in a world you've never been to, about a person who's nothing like you on the surface, you have been seen. Accurately. Completely. In a way that even people who know you well might not quite manage. Or it's a song. And the lyrics describe something so specific, not a grand universal feeling, but a small, precise, almost embarrassing particular one, that you feel a kind of shock. The shock of not being alone in something you thought was only yours. This is one of the things art does that nothing else quite does. It reaches through time and distance and complete strangers and delivers the message. I felt this too. I know this. You are not the only one. There's a writer named C.S. Lewis who said that we read to know we are not alone. And I think that's true, but I also think we do more than that. We read and listen and watch to discover things about ourselves that we didn't have language for before. Sometimes the book or the song or the film is the thing that names the feeling. Before it, you had the feeling but not a word. After, you have both, and the feeling becomes more real, more valid, more yours, because it has been identified. That's part of what's happening right now. You're watching this because something in you is looking to be understood, looking to have some of the wordless things in you put into words. And I hope that's happening. At least a little. There's something nobody tells you about being a person who loves deeply. You will spend a significant portion of your life missing things that are still technically present. Missing the version of your relationship that existed in the early days, even though the person is still there and the relationship is still there, and it's actually maybe better now in a lot of ways. Missing the intensity of how things used to feel before you got used to them. Missing the version of a friendship when it was new and everything was electric, with the freshness of being known by someone new. This is a strange feature of human attachment. We habituate, we adapt. The nervous system stops responding with the same intensity to things it's been exposed to repeatedly. This is functional. You couldn't live if every day felt like the first day of everything. If the familiar held the same intensity as the new. But it means that the most beloved things in your life are also, by definition, the things that have become somewhat transparent to you. The things you're so close to that you sometimes can't see them clearly. And then something shifts. A hard period, a close call, a departure and return. And suddenly you see them again. With fresh eyes. With the heart of someone who almost lost a thing and didn't. And it's overwhelming briefly to realize how much you love what you have and how little you've been feeling it recently. Not because the love went away, but because you got used to it. That's one of the cruelest and most interesting things about being human. We adapt to our blessings. We stop noticing them. And then we have to be reminded, usually by something uncomfortable, to look at them again. If you're going to take anything from tonight, maybe it's just that. Look at something you love tomorrow, with the eyes you'd use if you'd almost lost it. See if it changes how the day feels. I want to end with something about the night itself. About this particular hour and what it's for. The night doesn't belong to productivity. It doesn't belong to the version of you that had a to-do list and a schedule and a sense of what you're supposed to be doing. The night belongs to the version of you that is just a person, just a soft, temporary feeling creature in a body, in a room, on a planet that is hurling through space in the dark. There's research on something called the default mode network, the part of the brain that activates when you're not focused on any particular task. When you're daydreaming or resting or lying in the dark, half asleep. For a long time, neuroscientists thought this network was basically idle, just the brain killing time. But they've since discovered that it's actually doing some of the most important work the brain does. Integrating memory, processing emotion, making connections between things, building the narrative of who you are. The default mode network is, in a real sense, where the self lives, not in the focused, task-oriented, performing in the world version of you, but in the quiet, wandering, late-night version, the one who lies in the dark and thinks about their grandmother, and about time, and about whether they've been kind enough to the people they love. That version of you is not the distracted version. That version of you is actually the most you version of you there is. So, when you lie awake at night, thoughts drifting, you are not wasting time. You are not being unproductive. You are, in the deepest possible sense, being human. Your brain is doing its most intimate, most essential work. It is finding you. Be patient with it. Let it wander. Let the memories come up and pass through. Let the feelings be there without trying to solve them or explain them away. They are not problems. They are the texture of a life that has been lived with some degree of care and attention. You have loved things. You have lost things. You carry the past in ways that are invisible to most people around you. You are more complicated and more tender and more alive than you usually let on. That's okay. The night knows. The night is for exactly this. Sleep well.